I was standing in the middle of my own living room, shattered porcelain on the floor, my hands trembling as I clutched a crumpled piece of paper. On it was a number, just a number. But what it led to was the unraveling of every lie, every manipulation, every silent scream I had buried for years. The local news flickered on my television. There she was, Jasmine, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had smiled in my face for years while poisoning my son's heart against me. Her mugshot filled the screen, her perfect makeup gone, her calculated smile replaced by cold fear. Fraud charges, community outrage, lives destroyed. But that wasn't what made my knees give out. What truly broke me was realizing that everything Harold Whitman, the quiet old man from the corner house, had predicted had come true. And I had almost ignored him, if not for that one day. The day I brought him a plate of food, grieving and empty, and he handed me a number. A number that would lead me straight into the truth about my son, my family, and the lies I was never meant to uncover. My name is Diana Brooks, and this is how I found my voice again. Aurora. Illinois isn't one of those towns people write songs about. It's not glamorous or particularly noteworthy. But it was home, the only one I'd known for my entire 52 years. The streets were familiar, lined with modest houses where people lived ordinary lives, where I lived my ordinary life, until it wasn't ordinary anymore. The day we buried Madeline, my sister, the autumn wind carried leaves across the cemetery in lazy spirals. The sky was that particular shade of October blue that seems both endless and close enough to touch. I stood alone at her grave long after everyone else had left, feeling like half of my heart had been buried with her. She was the only one who never judged me, I whispered to the fresh mound of dirt. The only one who still believed in me. Madeline had been my rock after Robert died, leaving me to raise our son Jason alone. She'd helped with childcare while I worked double shifts. She'd brought groceries when money was tight. She'd held me through midnight panic attacks when I wondered how I'd manage another day. And most importantly, she'd been the only one who saw through Jasmine from the beginning. That girl's wearing a mask. She'd warned me 4 years ago, right after Jason introduced his new girlfriend. I've known women like her. They're empty inside, so they fill themselves with other people's lives. I should have listened. But Jason seemed so happy, so in love. And I was so desperate to remain in his life that I smiled through Jasmine's subtle insults and practiced condescension. The funeral had been small, just the way Madeline would have wanted it. My son Jason had shown up, of course, but only for the bare minimum of time required by social decency. He'd given me a quick, stiff hug, his expensive cologne unfamiliar and overwhelming. "I'm sorry, Mom," he'd said. And for a moment, I saw my boy again, the sensitive child who'd cry over injured birds. The teenager who'd spent hours helping elderly Mrs. Patterson with her garden after her arthritis got bad. But then Jasmine appeared at his side, her black designer dress more appropriate for a fashion show than a funeral. She'd placed one manicured hand on his arm, the diamond on her finger catching the light. "You'll be fine, Diana," she'd whispered with that insincere smirk. "You always bounce back." Then they'd driven away in their luxury SUV, leaving me standing alone with my grief. Back home, the silence pressed against my ears. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching Madeline's things that I'd collected from her apartment. A scarf, a framed photo, her favorite mug. My hands worked automatically, preparing dinner chicken casserole, mashed potatoes, green beans. Enough for 2, as I'd done for years when Madeline would come over on Wednesday nights. I stared at the extra plate. Tears welled up, but I blinked them back. Crying wouldn't bring her back. Crying wouldn't make Jason call. Crying wouldn't fill the emptiness. Instead, I packed the extra food neatly into a container. I couldn't bear to throw it away, and I couldn't bear to eat alone with the empty chair across from me. Then I remembered old Harold Whitman, the elderly man who lived in the corner house 3 doors down. People in the neighborhood had mixed feelings about Harold. Some said he was just a lonely widower. Others whispered that he was strange, possibly even crazy. He rarely left his house except to collect his mail or tend to his meticulously kept roses. In 15 years as neighbors, we'd exchanged perhaps a dozen words, mostly polite nods and weather comments. But tonight, aching and directionless, I needed anyone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't look at me with that awful pity that follows tragedy like a shadow. The evening air was cool as I walked down the street, the food container warm against my palms. Harold's house was small but tidy, with a porch light that cast a yellow glow across weathered steps. I hesitated before knocking. What was I doing? This was ridiculous. He'd think I was the crazy one, but before I could turn away, the door opened. Harold Whitman stood there, tall and thin in a cardigan sweater that had seen better days. His white hair was neatly combed and his eyes pale blue and surprisingly sharp-studied me with quiet intensity. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. I made too much food," I stammered, holding out the container. "I thought you might like some dinner." He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Would you like to sit for a moment?" The inside of Harold's house surprised me. I'd expected clutter, perhaps the stereotypical mess of a widower living alone. Instead, it was immaculate, with books arranged by height on built-in shelves, a chess set with a game in progress, and not a speck of dust anywhere. "Thank you for the food," Harold said, placing the container on a small table without opening it. "But I think you're the one who needs nourishment tonight." I sat stiffly on the edge of an armchair, unsure what I was doing there. "My sister died," I blurted out. "The funeral was today." Harold nodded slowly. "I know, Madeline. Cancer, wasn't it?" I blinked in surprise. "Yes, but how did you—" "I pay attention," he said simply. "More than people realize." We sat in silence for a moment, and strangely, it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something calming about Harold's presence, like being next to still water. Then, without warning, he stood and walked to a desk in the corner. He opened a drawer, removed a small notepad, and wrote something down. When he returned, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "This is a number," he said, his voice suddenly grave. "You won't understand now, but when you call it, everything will make sense." He paused, his eyes holding mine with surprising intensity. "Your daughter-in-law? She's not who she says she is. And soon that mask will fall." I stared at him, a chill running down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "Just keep the number," he said quietly. "When you're ready, you'll know." I left Harold's house that night with more questions than answers, the folded paper burning a hole in my pocket. Back home, I placed it in my jewelry box and tried to forget his strange warning, but I couldn't forget the look in his eyes, not pity, not judgment, but something I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. Recognition. The first time I understood what it meant to be truly alone was the night Robert died. One moment, we were laughing over dinner as he teased me about burning the garlic bread. The next, he was clutching his chest, his eyes wide with terror. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Heart attack? Massive, unsurvivable. Jason was only 10 years old. I remember standing in our bedroom afterward, staring at Robert's side of the closet, the neatly hung shirts, the row of polished shoes, the belt still draped over the hook where he'd left it that morning. Everything in perfect order, just waiting for a man who would never return. That's what grief is. A room kept ready for someone who's never coming back. In the years that followed, I rebuilt our lives piece by tiny piece. I took a job as a school custodian during the day and waited tables at night. I learned to fix leaky faucets, to change oil in our aging Buick, to help with algebra homework despite barely passing math myself. I became both mother and father to Jason, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being Diana. "You're just Jason's mom," I would tell my reflection sometimes. That's enough. That has to be enough, and for a long time it was. Jason was a good boy, thoughtful, smart, driven. He got a scholarship to the state university, the first in our family to go to college. I still remember his graduation day. I sat in the back row wearing a dress borrowed from Madeline, tears streaming down my face as he accepted his diploma. "That's my son," I kept whispering to no one in particular. "That's my boy." Jason got a job at a marketing firm in Chicago but chose to stay in Aurora, commuting daily. I was selfishly grateful. Those quick morning coffees and occasional Sunday dinners were the highlights of my week. Then, about 4 years ago, he brought Jasmine home. She was beautiful in that polished, perfect way that makes ordinary women like me feel instantly inadequate. Long chestnut hair, expertly highlighted. Clothes that whispered of money without shouting it. A laugh that sounded practiced but charming. She was from Chicago, she said. Her father was in finance. Her mother a former model-turned-charity organizer. "Your house is so charming," she said that first day, looking around my living room with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Very retro. My furniture wasn't retro, it was just old. But I smiled and thanked her, pretending not to notice how she subtly wiped her hand on her skirt after touching my couch. "You really raised Jason all by yourself?" she asked later, eyebrows raised in a perfect arch. Wow. You must be so proud of how he turned out considering what, she didn't say. But the implication hung in the air like smoke. I should have seen the warning signs then. The way Jason watched her face before laughing at my jokes. How he suddenly found fault with the meals he'd loved his entire life. The way he started referring to our neighborhood as still developing, rather than simply home. But I was so afraid of losing him that I swallowed every slight, smiled through every subtle dig. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I forced enthusiasm I didn't feel and offered to help with wedding plans. Jasmine's response was a masterclass in polite dismissal. "That's sweet, Diana, but Mom's already hired the best planner in Chicago. You don't need to worry about bringing anything to the bridal shower. Just your presence is enough, just my presence." As if I were a child to be tolerated, not the woman who had raised the man she was marrying. The wedding was elaborate, held at a vineyard I could never afford to visit otherwise. I wasn't included in the rehearsal dinner. My simple blue dress looked shabby next to the designer outfits of Jasmine's family. When the minister asked who gives this man in marriage, no one had thought to include me in the ceremony. Afterward, as the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Bali, Jason hugged me briefly. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, as if I were just another guest. "I love you," I replied, but he was already turning away, Jasmine's hand possessively on his arm. The changes accelerated after that. Visits became rare. Phone calls shortened to quick check-ins. I'd leave voicemails that went unreturned for days. When I dropped by their new house with homemade cookies or a casserole, Jasmine would accept them with that same practiced smile, but they were never mentioned again. I often wondered if they went straight into the trash once I left. Then came the garden party incident, 3 months before Madeline's diagnosis. Jason called on a Wednesday, sounding happier than he had in months. "Mom, we're having some people over on Saturday. Jasmine thought it would be nice if you came." "Around 2?" My heart soared. Finally, an invitation! I spent 3 days preparing, making my specialty deviled eggs with paprika, buying a new blouse I couldn't afford, even getting my hair trimmed for the first time in 6 months. When I arrived at their Tudor-style home in the expensive part of town, cars lined the driveway. I could hear laughter and music from the backyard as I approached the door, balancing my tray of eggs. Jasmine answered, wearing a flowing summer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile froze when she saw me. "Diana," she said, voice suddenly loud enough for others to hear. "Oh, Jason didn't tell you? This is a formal event." I looked down at my department store blouse and slacks. Then at the deviled eggs I'd spent hours perfecting. "You can leave those," she continued, taking the tray but not inviting me in. "And maybe come back next time when there's a more suitable gathering." I heard snickers behind her friends, I assumed. Jasmine's perfectly made-up face showed no malice, only a sort of practiced pity that was somehow worse. And just beyond her, I caught a glimpse of Jason, watching but saying nothing. Nothing at all to defend his mother. I drove home in a fog, pulled into my driveway, and sat there until the sun set. Then I walked to my empty porch and cried until there were no tears left. That night, I called Madeline. "I've lost him," I sobbed into the phone. "No, honey," she said fiercely. "She's taken him." "That's different. And what's taken can be brought back." But 2 weeks later, Madeline started feeling tired all the time. A month after that came the diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, already spread too far. We had 6 months with her, 6 precious months that Jason visited exactly twice, both times with Jasmine hovering nearby, checking her watch. Now, with Madeline gone, I was truly alone. The paper Harold had given me sat in my jewelry box, untouched. I wasn't ready to face whatever truth it might hold. Not yet. First, I needed to grieve my sister, to find my footing in this new, emptier world, but fate, it seems, had other plans. Just 3 weeks after Madeline's funeral, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Brooks?" said a woman's voice. "This is Evelyn Martin from the Aurora Credit Union. There's been some unusual activity on your account that we need to discuss. Could you come in today?" That meeting would change everything. But as I drove to the bank that morning, I had no idea that the first domino was already falling and that the chain reaction would expose secrets I wasn't prepared to face. The Aurora Credit Union building stood like a sentinel of respectability on Main Street, all gleaming glass and polished marble. I'd always felt slightly intimidated walking through those heavy doors, as if my modest bank balance somehow made me less worthy of the plush carpeting and mahogany desks. Evelyn Martin's office was tucked away in a corner, small but immaculate. She was a trim woman in her 40s with sensible shoes and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. I'd seen her at community events but never spoken to her directly. "Mrs. Brooks, thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I apologize for the cryptic phone call, but some matters are best discussed in person." My stomach knotted with anxiety. "Is there a problem with my account?" "Not exactly." She folded her hands on the desk. "3 days ago, someone attempted to open a line of credit in your name. They had your social security number, date of birth, and other personal information. The application was for $50,000. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I never applied for any credit line, I know. That's why I flagged it." Evelyn's expression softened. "The application listed your annual income as $120,000 and your occupation as executive assistant to the CEO of Westlake Properties." I almost laughed. "I clean the high school and wait tables at Denny's on weekends." "Exactly. Which is why our fraud department is now involved." She hesitated. "Mrs. Brooks Diana, the application was submitted online, but the callback verification number provided belongs to Jasmine Brooks. Your daughter-in-law. The air left my lungs in a rush. There must be some mistake." "I wish there were." Evelyn slid a folder across the desk. "This isn't the first attempt. There have been 3 credit card applications in your name in the past 2 months. 2 were approved before we caught on." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Credit card statements for cards I'd never seen, much less used. Charges for designer clothing, spa treatments, restaurant meals at places I'd never visited. Thousands of dollars, all in my name. "This is identity theft," I whispered. "Yes. And it's a felony." Evelyn removed her glasses. "Diana, I know this is difficult, but you need to report this to the police." "I can't." The words escaped before I could stop them. "She's my son's wife." "She's stealing from you," Evelyn countered gently. "And if she's doing this to you, she may be doing it to others." I left the bank with the folder clutched to my chest, my mind racing. How could Jasmine do this? Did Jason know? Was this why they'd pushed me away so I wouldn't discover their financial schemes? I drove home on autopilot, barely registering the familiar streets. Inside my house, I spread the documents across my kitchen table, studying charges that told the story of a life I'd never lived. Boutique purchases, airline tickets, hotel stays, all while I'd been pinching pennies to repair my leaking roof. The betrayal cut deep, but something else bothered me even more. How had Harold Whitman known? Why had he given me that number? What else did he know about Jasmine that I didn't? With shaking fingers, I retrieved the folded paper from my jewelry box and smoothed it open. The number was written in neat, precise handwriting. Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed. 3 rings, then a woman's voice answered. "Bennett and Hayes, Family Investigations. How may I direct your call?" I froze. Family Investigations? Was this some kind of private detective agency? "Hello?" the woman prompted. I'm sorry," I stammered. "I think I have the wrong number. May I ask who referred you?" Her tone was professional but warm. The words stuck in my throat. Finally, "Harold Whitman." A long pause followed. Then, "Ma'am, we've been waiting for you." The world seemed to stop. "Waiting for me? I don't understand." "Mr. Whitman contacted us several weeks ago. He said you might call." Her voice lowered slightly. "Mrs. Brooks, we have information regarding Jasmine Delgado, or as you know her, Jasmine Brooks. Would you be willing to meet with one of our investigators?" "Jasmine Delgado?" My mind reeled. "Yes," I heard myself say. "When? How about today? 4 o'clock?" 3 hours later, I sat in another office, this one considerably less polished than the bank. Bennett and Hayes Family Investigations operated from a converted Victorian home on the outskirts of town, its exterior giving no hint of the business within. The investigator who greeted me was a stocky man in his 50s named Michael Hayes. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but assessing. "Mrs. Brooks, thank you for coming," he said, leading me to a comfortable sitting area rather than a formal desk. "I understand this is difficult. I don't even know why I'm here, I admitted. Or how Harold Whitman is involved, Hayes nodded. Harold is an old colleague. He retired from our agency 15 years ago after a difficult case, but he keeps his eyes open. When Jasmine and your son moved to the neighborhood, he recognized her. He's been watching ever since, gathering information, waiting for the right moment. Recognized her from where? I asked, my mouth dry. Hayes opened a file folder and removed a photograph. It showed a younger Jasmine, perhaps 22 or 23, in a formal office setting. Her hair was shorter, her makeup less sophisticated, but it was undeniably her. This is Jasmine Delgado, age 22, executive assistant at the Children's Hope Foundation in Des Moines, Iowa, Hayes explained. In 2016, she pleaded no contest to charges of embezzling nearly $75,000 from the nonprofit. Because she cooperated and agreed to pay restitution, the case was sealed. I stared at the photo, unable to reconcile this information with the polished woman who had married my son. She changed her name. Legally, yes, shortly after the case was resolved. Then she moved to Chicago, reinvented herself, and began targeting wealthy men or men with potential. Hayes passed me another document. This is one of 3 men we know she's had relationships with before Jason, Thomas Lawson, investment banker. After their breakup, he discovered his identity had been used to secure loans totaling over $200,000. My head was spinning. Does she even love my son? Hayes' expression softened. Mrs. Brooks, I can't answer that. But I can tell you that 6 months ago, Jasmine and Jason formed a company called Brookstone Properties. They've been soliciting investments for real estate developments that don't exist. What? The word came out as a whisper. We believe Jasmine is setting Jason up to take the fall when it all collapses. The company paperwork is structured so that he appears to be the primary operator, though she controls the accounts. Tears burned behind my eyes. Jason wouldn't knowingly defraud people. Perhaps not. But he's signed documents that say otherwise. Hayes leaned forward. Mrs. Brooks, one of the previous men Jasmine was involved with, took his own life after financial ruin. We don't want history to repeat itself. I thought of my son, my bright, kind boy, who had once helped elderly Mrs. Patterson with her garden when her arthritis got bad. The boy who had cried over injured birds and worked so hard to make me proud. Had Jasmine truly corrupted him, or was he an unwitting pawn in her scheme? What should I do? I asked, voice breaking. We have enough evidence to take to the authorities, Hayes said gently. But Jason needs to hear this from you first, face to face. If he's involved knowingly, he needs a chance to come clean. If he's being manipulated, he needs to know before it's too late. I left Bennett and Hayes with a heavier heart, but also with a strange sense of clarity. The fog of confusion that had surrounded my relationship with Jason and Jasmine was lifting, revealing an ugly truth beneath. But truth, no matter how painful, was preferable to the bewildered hurt I'd been living with. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Harold Whitman tending his roses. Our eyes met across the street, and he gave me a single, solemn nod. No smile, no wave, just acknowledgement. He had opened the door to the truth, and now I had to walk through it. That night, I called my son for the first time in weeks. Mom? Jason sounded surprised. Is everything okay? No, I said honestly. But it will be. Can you and Jasmine come for brunch on Sunday? There's something important we need to discuss. A pause. What's this about? I thought of all the Sunday meals Jasmine had declined, all the invitations met with excuses. This time would be different. Family finances, I said. It can't wait. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that seems designed to mock inner turmoil. I'd been up since 5, baking cinnamon rolls from scratch, Jason's favorite since childhood, and brewing coffee strong enough to fortify my courage. The folder from Evelyn Martin sat on the counter, along with copies of the information Michael Hayes had provided. I'd spent hours organizing everything, creating a clear timeline of Jasmine's deceptions. I wasn't sure what I hoped would happen. Part of me still prayed this was all a terrible mistake, that there would be reasonable explanations for everything, but the larger part knew better. Harold Whitman had recognized a predator in our midst, and now I needed to protect my son, even if it meant destroying his marriage. At precisely 10:30, a sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Jason and Jasmine emerge. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there at Madeline's funeral. Jasmine wore pristine white pants and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in an elegant ponytail. They made a beautiful couple, a magazine-worthy image of success. But images can lie. I knew that now. "Mom," Jason said as I opened the door, giving me a quick hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "The house smells amazing. Those aren't your famous cinnamon rolls, are they?" Jasmine's smile was perfect, practiced. "Jason raves about them. But you know I'm gluten-free now." "There's fruit salad too," I said, leading them to the dining room where I'd set the table with my best dishes, the ones that had been wedding gifts to Robert and me 30 years ago. We engaged in stilted small talk while serving ourselves. The weather. A new restaurant downtown. Jasmine's charity committee. Not once did either of them ask how I was coping with Madeline's death or whether I needed anything. "So," Jason said finally, setting down his coffee cup, "you mentioned something about finances?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, there's been some concerning activity I wanted to discuss with you both." Jasmine's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, are you having money problems, Diana? We'd be happy to help, wouldn't we, Jason?" The condescension in her tone steeled my resolve. I opened the folder from the bank and placed the credit card statements in front of them. "These cards were opened in my name," I said quietly. "I never applied for them. I never used them. But someone has charged thousands of dollars to them." Jason frowned, genuinely confused. "Identity theft? Mom, that's terrible. Have you reported it?" "Not yet." I looked directly at Jasmine. "Because the verification phone number on the applications is yours, Jasmine." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason turned to his wife, confusion written across his face. But Jasmine didn't flinch. "That's ridiculous," she said smoothly. "There must be some mistake. The bank doesn't think so." I placed another document on the table. "And neither does Bennett and Hayes Family Investigations, who have been tracking your activities for months." At this, Jasmine's composure slipped, just slightly, but enough. A flash of something cold and calculating crossed her face before the mask of concern returned. "Family Investigations? Diana, what are you talking about? Have you been spying on us?" "Not me," I said calmly. "But someone recognized you, Jasmine. Or should I call you Jasmine Delgado? That was your name before you changed it after embezzling from the Children's Hope Foundation in Iowa, wasn't it?" Jason's face had gone white. "Mom, what the hell? It's all here, Jason." I slid the folder toward him. "The name change. The sealed records. The other men she targeted before you. And most recently, the fraudulent investment scheme you two have been running through Brookstone Properties. That's my legitimate business." Jason protested, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The properties don't exist." "Son," I said gently, "the developments you're selling investments for, they're fabrications." "This is insane," Jasmine interrupted, standing so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. "Jason, your mother has clearly lost her mind with grief. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of—" "Then explain these," I said, pushing forward credit card statements showing charges in Chicago and New York on days when Jasmine had claimed to be visiting her parents in Florida. "And these. Bank withdrawals from accounts in my name that I'd never opened. And this." A statement from an elderly investor who'd put his retirement savings into Brookstone Properties based on Jasmine's personal guarantee. Jason was flipping through the papers, his expression shifting from disbelief to dawning horror. "Jazz," he said, his voice hollow. "What is this?" For a moment, I thought Jasmine might continue to deny everything. But something in Jason's face must have told her the game was up. Her expression hardened, the pleasant mask dropping completely. "You think you can ruin me with old stories?" She hissed, glaring at me. "I've built a life now. And Jason's not leaving me, not when his name is on every document." The room went still. Jason turned to her slowly. "My name is on what?" Jasmine seemed to realize her mistake immediately. She reached for his hand. "Baby, I just meant that we're partners in everything. Your mom is trying to come between us with these ridiculous accusations. What documents, Jasmine?" Jason pulled his hand away. "What exactly have I signed?" I watched my son's face as realization dawned, the understanding that he'd been used, manipulated, set up. In that moment, he looked young again, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. "The investor agreements," he said slowly. "The bank loans. You said they were just formalities, that your name couldn't be on them because of some issue with your previous job." Jasmine's expression turned calculating. "Jason, be reasonable. We've built something together. Your mother is jealous. She's always been jealous of our success, our happiness. Stop it. Jason's voice was quiet but firm. Just stop. I want to see all the paperwork for Brookstone. Every document. Now, what followed was painful to watch. Jasmine's tactics shifted rapidly from denial to anger to tears to seduction. When none worked, she resorted to threats. You'll go down with me, she said coldly. You think anyone will believe you didn't know? Your signature is everywhere. Then I'll face the consequences, Jason replied, a strength in his voice I hadn't heard in years. But I won't live a lie anymore. She left in a flurry of curses and slammed doors, taking their SUV and leaving Jason standing in my driveway, looking lost and broken. He turned to me, his face a map of pain and confusion. How did you know? How did you find all this out? I thought of Harold Whitman and his roses, of the number that had changed everything. Someone was watching out for us, I said simply. Someone who recognized what she was. Jason nodded slowly, then looked back at the house, the modest home where he'd grown up, where I'd raised him alone after Robert died, where I'd waited for his return for 4 long years. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I am so sorry. I opened my arms, and my son, my real son, not the polished stranger Jasmine had created, stepped into them. He was taller than me now, broader, but as he sobbed against my shoulder, I felt the weight of him as I had when he was small. We'll figure this out, I promised, though I had no idea how to undo the damage Jasmine had done. Together. And for the first time in years, I believed it might be true. The aftermath of confronting Jasmine unfolded like a fever-breaking, painful but necessary. Within 24 hours, Jason moved back into his childhood bedroom, bringing only a duffel bag of clothes and his laptop. The rest of his possessions remained in the house he'd shared with Jasmine, a pristine Tudor-style home that had never felt like his own. I can't believe how blind I was, he said that first night, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of tea growing cold between his hands. She isolated me so carefully, so completely. Every time I wanted to call you or visit, there was always some reason not to. That's what people like her do, I replied gently. They create a bubble where you can only see what they want you to see. The next morning, Jason contacted Michael Hayes at Bennett & Hayes. Together, they went through every document related to Brookstone Properties, cataloging the extent of Jasmine's fraud. The news wasn't good. Jason's signature appeared on loan applications, investor agreements, and bank accounts he had no memory of signing. Some signatures were forged. Others he'd signed blindly, trusting Jasmine's explanations without question. I'm going to lose everything, he said when he returned, his face ashen. My career, my savings. I might even go to jail. No, I said firmly. You're going to tell the truth. That's the only way forward. Jason nodded, a mixture of fear and resolve in his eyes. I have to go to the police tomorrow. Hayes thinks if I come forward voluntarily, show I was manipulated, cooperate fully, I might avoid criminal charges. I'm coming with you, I said. It wasn't a question. That night, unable to sleep, I stepped onto my porch for fresh air. The street was quiet, houses dark except for Harold Whitman's porch light, a steady beacon in the darkness. On impulse, I wrapped my cardigan tighter and walked toward it. Harold answered on the first knock, as if he'd been waiting. Without a word, he gestured me inside. You knew, I said when we were seated in his immaculate living room. You knew everything, Harold nodded, his pale blue eyes solemn. Not everything, but enough. Why did you help us? You barely know me. He was silent for a long moment. Then, I had a daughter once, Caroline, beautiful, smart, kind-hearted. His voice, usually steady, wavered slightly. She married a man named Edward Harmon. Charming, successful, a predator in disguise. My heart clenched. What happened? He isolated her, controlled her. When she finally realized what he was and tried to leave, Harold looked away. She didn't make it. Drove her car off a bridge. The official ruling was accident, but I knew better. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I was an investigator for 30 years. I tracked criminals, fraudsters, con artists. But I couldn't save my own daughter. His hands, spotted with age, remained perfectly steady as he spoke. When I saw Jasmine Brooks, I recognized the type immediately. The calculated charm, the subtle manipulations. I started watching, gathering information. But why not go directly to Jason? Or the police? Would Jason have believed a strange old man over the wife he adored? Harold's smile was sad. No, but he would believe his mother. When you came to my door that night, I knew it was time. I thought of the countless tiny cruelties I'd endured, the subtle ways Jasmine had cut me out of Jason's life. How different might things have been if I'd recognized her for what she was from the beginning? Don't, Harold said, reading my thoughts. Predators like Jasmine are experts at deception. That's how they survive. As I stood to leave, Harold reached for my hand, the first physical contact we'd ever shared. Your son came to see me yesterday, he said. He wanted to thank me. He's a good man, Diana, nothing like Edward Harmon. He'll recover from this. Walking home under the stars, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The path ahead would be difficult, but at least now we were walking in truth. The next morning, Jason and I drove to the Aurora Police Department. The detective who took his statement was a woman named Reyes, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened without interruption as Jason explained everything. How he'd met Jasmine, how their relationship had progressed, how she'd gradually taken control of his finances and isolated him from family and friends, how she'd established Brookstone Properties with him as the figurehead while she controlled the money, how investors, many of them elderly or vulnerable, had lost thousands. I didn't know, Jason concluded, his voice hollow. But I should have. I should have asked questions, verified things. I was willfully blind because I wanted to believe in the life she promised. Detective Reyes studied him for a long moment. Mr. Brooks, what you're describing is a sophisticated con. You're not the first victim, and you won't be the last. The fact that you've come forward voluntarily will count in your favor. Will I face charges? Jason asked, the question that had kept him awake all night. That will depend on the district attorney. But I'll note your cooperation in my report. She gathered her papers. We'll need to take a formal statement, and you'll need to surrender your passport. This investigation could take months. As we left the police station, Jason's shoulders slumped with the weight of uncertainty. What do I do now? My career is over. Everyone will know, I took his hand. One day at a time. That's how I got through losing your father. One foot in front of the other. For the first time in years, he really looked at me not with impatience or polite disinterest, but with genuine respect. How did you do it, Mom? Raise me alone all those years? The same way we'll get through this, I said. Together. That evening, a local news van parked outside Jasmine's house. By morning, her face was on the front page of the Aurora Gazette, alongside headlines about fraud and investment scams. My phone rang constantly. Neighbors, old friends, even Jason's high school teachers, all expressing shock and offering support. But the call that mattered most came from Evelyn Martin at the credit union. Diana, I just heard, she said. The police contacted us about the fraudulent accounts. I wanted you to know we're canceling all charges against you. Your credit will be fully restored. Thank you, I said, tears pricking my eyes. That means more than you know. As I hung up, I noticed Jason standing in the doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What is it? I asked. I just realized something, he said quietly. All those years growing up, when you worked 2 jobs and never complained, when you skipped meals so I could have new school clothes, when you pawned your wedding ring to fix my car. I never really saw it. I never understood what it cost you. I started to dismiss his words. It was what mothers did after all, but stopped myself. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge the truth of my own sacrifice. It was hard, I admitted. The hardest thing I've ever done. But also the most worthwhile. Jason crossed the room and hugged me tight. I'm going to make this right, Mom. Somehow. For the first time since Madeline's death, I felt a flicker of hope. Not because the road ahead would be easy, it wouldn't. But because my son was finding his way back to himself, to the person he'd been before Jasmine. And that was worth more than any justice the courts might deliver. Jasmine was arrested on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after our confrontation. The news broke across local stations with surprising speed, attractive young woman, prominent local businessman, elderly victims, fraud allegations. It had all the elements of a scandal Aurora hadn't seen in decades. Jason watched the coverage in silence, his face impassive as the mugshot appeared on screen. Gone was Jasmine's perfect makeup and calculated smile, replaced by hollow eyes and a defiant set to her jaw. She doesn't even look sorry, he said finally. People like Jasmine don't feel remorse the way others do, I replied, remembering Harold's words. They feel inconvenienced, caught, exposed, but not guilty. The charges were extensive: identity theft, wire fraud, investment fraud, forgery. The prosecutor's office was building a case that spanned years, with victims in 3 states. Jason had been interviewed 6 times, providing documents, emails, text messages, anything that might show he'd been manipulated rather than complicit. His cooperation helped, but the shadow of suspicion lingered. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The marketing firm where he'd worked for 5 years placed him on indefinite leave. Whispers followed him through the grocery store, the bank, the post office. "They think I knew," he said one evening, slumping onto the couch after another day of interviews with investigators. "They think I helped her steal from those people." I sat beside him, wishing I could absorb some of his pain. Give it time. The truth will come out. What if it doesn't? What if I never shake this? What if I go to jail? I thought of all the nights I'd spent worrying about money after Robert died, all the times I'd wondered if I could keep our little family afloat. This fear was different, but no less consuming. "Then we'll face it," I said simply. "One day at a time," Jason managed a weak smile. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early December, a date that loomed over us like a shadow. Jason's attorney, a serious young woman named Rebecca Lynn, was cautiously optimistic about his chances of avoiding prosecution, but nothing was certain. "The DA needs someone to blame," she explained during a strategy session at my kitchen table. "Jasmine is the obvious target, but Jason's name is on too many documents for them to ignore him completely." "But he's cooperating," I protested. "He came forward voluntarily." "Which helps enormously," Rebecca agreed. "But we need more. We need to show a pattern of manipulation and control that predates the financial fraud." This was harder than it seemed. Jasmine had been careful to maintain a perfect public image: charitable, gracious, devoted. Only those closest to them had glimpsed the reality behind closed doors. "What about her previous victims?" I suggested. "The men she scammed before Jason?" Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "Michael Hayes mentioned one named Thomas Lawson. If he'd be willing to testify about his experience with Jasmine, it could establish a pattern." Finding Thomas Lawson proved challenging. He'd left Chicago after his financial ruin, apparently seeking a fresh start away from painful memories. It was Harold Whitman who eventually tracked him down to a small apartment in Minneapolis, where he worked as a high school math teacher. "I spoke with him," Harold told me during one of our increasingly frequent evening conversations. "He's reluctant to get involved. Said he's put that chapter of his life behind him. But if he knew what was at stake for Jason," I told him. "He'll think about it." Harold's expression softened. "Give him time, Diana. Facing someone who destroyed your life isn't easy." Meanwhile, Jason focused on rebuilding what he could. He volunteered at the community food bank, anonymous in a hairnet and apron. He attended financial counseling sessions, learning to manage the modest savings he had left after legal fees. He went to therapy twice a week, unpacking the subtle ways Jasmine had isolated and controlled him. "My therapist says it was emotional abuse," he told me one evening, the words coming slowly, painfully. She says I was groomed, basically. That Jasmine picked me because I was successful but also trusting. Easy to manipulate. The admission clearly cost him, shame coloring his cheeks. I remembered my proud, confident son, the boy who'd graduated with honors, who'd landed a coveted marketing job straight out of college. How carefully Jasmine had dismantled that confidence piece by piece. "It doesn't make you weak," I said firmly. "It makes you human." December arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that fools flowers into early bloom only to kill them with an inevitable frost. 2 days before the preliminary hearing, Jason received a call from Rebecca Lynn. "Thomas Lawson has agreed to testify," she announced, her usually measured voice tinged with excitement. "And there's more. Hayes has located a third victim, Martin Corrigan. His story mirrors yours almost exactly. The DA's office is reconsidering their approach. They're talking about offering you immunity in exchange for continued cooperation." Jason's relief was palpable. "So I might not be charged at all?" "It's looking that way. But Jason," her voice turned serious, "if this goes to trial, you'll have to testify. You'll have to face Jasmine in court and detail every manipulation, every lie. Are you prepared for that?" After hanging up, Jason sat in silence for a long moment. I don't know if I can do it, he admitted finally. Look her in the eye, I mean. Every time I think about seeing her again, I feel, I don't know, like I might fall under her spell again. Like maybe all of this is a mistake and she really did love me. That's normal, I assured him, though my heart ached at his confusion. Your therapist would call it trauma bonding. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means the connection was real for you, even if it wasn't for her. The day before the hearing, I came home from grocery shopping to find Jason sitting on the front porch, a letter in his hands. What's that? I asked, setting down my bags. It's from Jasmine. His voice was strange, distant. Delivered by courier. Rebecca says I shouldn't have accepted it, but what does it say? He handed me the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, Jasmine's elegant handwriting flowing across the page. Jason, by now they've poisoned your mind against me completely. Your mother. That old man. The investigators. They've made you believe I never loved you, that everything was a lie. It wasn't. What we had was real. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I have a past. But I wanted to build a future with you, a real future. The investments were going to pay off. We were going to have everything we ever wanted. They don't understand people like us, Jason. People who want more than mediocrity. Your mother has been trying to drag you down to her level since the day we met. She's jealous of what we had, what we could still have. I can fix this. My attorney says if you recant your statements, if you tell them you were a willing partner who got cold feet, this all goes away. We could start over somewhere new. The money is still there hidden where they'll never find it. Enough for a fresh start, think about it. Remember how good we were together. Remember who you really are. Forever yours, Jasmine. I looked up, my heart pounding. Jason, he took the letter back, folding it carefully. Don't worry. I'm not going to do it. But you're tempted, I said, not a question. He sighed deeply. For about 3 seconds I was. Not because I believe her, but because it would be easier. No testimony. No public humiliation. Just gone. He shook his head. But then I thought about those investors. The elderly couple who lost their retirement savings. The single mom who wanted to pay for her kids' college. I can't walk away from that. Pride swelled in my chest, not because he'd made the choice I wanted, but because he'd made it for the right reasons. Whatever Jasmine had done to him, she hadn't destroyed his moral compass. That remained intact, like a lighthouse guiding him home through storm-tossed waters. That night, I called Harold and told him about the letter. She's desperate, he said, his voice calm as always. Cornered predators are the most dangerous. Stay vigilant, Diana. This isn't over yet. As I hung up, I gazed out my window toward Harold's house, the porch light glowing steadily in the darkness. In just a few months, this quiet old man had become more than a neighbor. He was an ally, a confidant, perhaps even a friend. Without him, Jasmine might have destroyed my son completely. Some debts can never be repaid. But perhaps they're not meant to be. Perhaps they're meant to be passed forward instead, one act of kindness becoming the seed for another. Tomorrow would bring the hearing, the first public step in a long journey toward justice. I didn't know how it would end, but for the first time in years, I felt certain we were on the right path, a path illuminated by truth, however painful that truth might be. The Aurora County Courthouse stood like a monument to order and justice, all limestone columns and broad steps leading to heavy wooden doors. On the morning of Jasmine's preliminary hearing, those steps were crowded with reporters, curious onlookers, and the victims of her fraud. Jason and I arrived early, accompanied by Rebecca Lynn. My son wore the navy suit I'd helped him choose, conservative. Respectful, nothing like the flashy designer clothes Jasmine had preferred. His face was pale but composed, his shoulders straight despite the weight they carried. Remember, Rebecca said quietly as we approached, you're not on trial today. You're a cooperating witness. Just tell the truth exactly as you've prepared. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, intimate enough that everyone could hear each whispered comment, see each reaction. Harold Whitman was already seated in the back row. He nodded once as we entered, his steady presence a comfort. Then the side door opened and Jasmine appeared, escorted by a court officer. My breath caught. Despite everything, she was still beautiful, though not in the polished, perfect way I remembered. Her prison-issued clothes hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, once highlighted and styled weekly at an expensive salon, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without her usual makeup, she looked younger, almost vulnerable, until she saw Jason. Then her eyes hardened, calculating and cold. She mouthed something I couldn't catch, and Jason flinched beside me. "Don't look at her," Rebecca advised. "Focus on me or the judge." The proceedings began with formal charges read in the prosecutor's steady voice. Multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, investment fraud, forgery. The evidence against Jasmine was substantial bank records, forged documents, testimony from previous victims. Thomas Lawson was there, a tall man with tired eyes who couldn't look directly at Jasmine. Martin Corrigan had sent a video deposition, too ill to travel but determined to see justice done. Then it was Jason's turn. As he took the stand, I held my breath, praying he'd find the strength to speak his truth clearly. "Mr. Brooks," the prosecutor began, "please describe your relationship with the defendant." Jason swallowed hard. "Jasmine Ms. Delgado was my wife for 3 years. Before that, we dated for about 6 months. And during your relationship, did Ms. Delgado have access to your financial information?" "Yes, we shared everything. Or I thought we did." Jason's voice grew steadier as he continued, detailing how Jasmine had gradually taken control of their finances, isolated him from family and friends, and established Brookstone Properties with him as the figurehead. "I signed documents she put in front of me," he admitted, sometimes without reading them completely. "I trusted her. She told me they were routine paperwork, formalities for our business." "And when did you realize something was wrong?" Jason glanced at me briefly. "My mother discovered fraudulent credit cards opened in her name. The verification number traced back to Jasmine. That led to further investigation, which revealed everything else." Throughout his testimony, Jasmine watched him intently, her expression shifting between wounded innocence and cold calculation. When Jason described finding investors' money missing from company accounts, she leaned forward and whispered urgently to her attorney. "She's trying to intimidate him," Harold murmured beside me. I hadn't noticed him move to my row. Classic tactic. But Jason didn't falter. His voice remained steady, his answers clear and direct. When the defense attorney tried to suggest he had been a willing participant who turned on Jasmine to save himself, Jason acknowledged his own failures without accepting their narrative. "I was blind," he said simply. "I didn't ask questions I should have asked. I ignored warning signs. I allowed myself to be manipulated because I wanted to believe in the life she promised. That's my responsibility, and I'll live with it forever. But I never knowingly defrauded anyone." When it was over, the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Jasmine was led away, her attorney already discussing bail options. As we left the courtroom, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing in our faces. "Mr. Brooks, did you know about your wife's criminal history?" "Mrs. Brooks, how does it feel to know your daughter-in-law was stealing your identity?" "Jason, will you testify against Jasmine at trial?" Rebecca guided us through the crowd to her waiting car. "That went as well as we could have hoped," she said once we were safely inside. "The DA seems inclined to offer you immunity, Jason. They're focusing entirely on Jasmine now." Jason nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "What happens next?" "Her attorney will push for bail. Given the amount involved in flight risk, it's unlikely to be granted. Then we prepare for trial, probably 3 to 4 months from now." Rebecca checked her phone. "I have to get back to the office." "Will you be okay?" We assured her we would. As her car pulled away, Jason turned to me with haunted eyes. "She looked different," he said quietly. "Prison does that," Harold remarked, appearing beside us. "Strips away the artifice." "She still got to me," Jason admitted. For a moment, when she was watching me testify, part of me wanted to take it all back. "To protect her," Harold nodded, understanding in his pale blue eyes. "That's normal. The hold these people have, it doesn't break all at once. It unravels slowly, like a sweater losing threads." We walked toward my car in silence, each lost in thought. The December sky hung low and gray, promising snow by evening. As we reached the parking lot, a familiar black SUV pulled alongside us. The window lowered, revealing Jasmine's father, a stern-faced man I'd met only twice before. "I hope you're satisfied," he said coldly, addressing Jason. "Destroying my daughter's life over a few financial missteps." Before Jason could respond, I stepped forward. "Your daughter stole from elderly people. She committed identity theft. She forged signatures. Those aren't missteps. You never thought she was good enough for your son, he countered. You've been trying to sabotage their marriage from day one. That's not true, Jason interjected, his voice stronger than I expected. My mother welcomed Jasmine. She tried for years to be part of our lives. Jasmine was the one who pushed her away. Jasmine said you were weak, her father spat, too easily influenced by mommy. I guess she was right. Harold moved then, positioning himself subtly between us and the SUV. I suggest you leave, he said quietly. Before you say something that might be construed as witness intimidation, the older man's eyes narrowed. Who the hell are you? Someone who recognizes your daughter for exactly what she is. Harold's voice remained calm, but something in his eyes made Jasmine's father recoil slightly. And someone who won't let her hurt this family anymore. For a tense moment, I thought the confrontation might escalate. Then the man's jaw tightened and he rolled up his window. The SUV pulled away with a screech of tires on pavement. He won't be back, Harold said with quiet certainty. That night, snow fell in thick, silent flakes, covering Aurora in a blanket of white. Jason and I sat on the porch despite the cold, mugs of hot chocolate warming our hands. Down the street, Harold's porch light glowed steadily through the swirling snow. Do you think she ever loved me? Jason asked suddenly. Even for a moment? I considered my answer carefully. I think Jasmine loves the idea of love, the appearance of it, the benefits of it. But real love involves sacrifice, and I don't think she's capable of that. Jason nodded slowly. I think you're right. He was quiet for a moment, then. I'm going to start looking for a job next week. Something different. Maybe teaching? I've always been good at explaining things. Pride swelled in my chest. Not because he'd chosen a particular path, but because he was choosing at all reclaiming his agency, his future. Whatever Jasmine had taken from him, she hadn't stolen his capacity to rebuild. You'll be wonderful at whatever you choose, I said, and meant it. Spring came to Aurora with a rush of green, crocuses pushing through soil still cold from winter. In my small backyard, I planted a memorial garden for Madeline Foxgloves and Bleeding Hearts, her favorites. Jason helped me turn the soil and set the tender seedlings, his hands gentle with new life. 4 months had passed since the preliminary hearing. 4 months of slow, steady healing. Jason had found a position teaching marketing at the community college, his previous experience transforming into valuable lessons for his students. He'd moved into a small apartment downtown, close enough to visit often, far enough to reclaim his independence. The legal proceedings against Jasmine continued, complicated by her attorney's delaying tactics. But the prosecution's case grew stronger as more victims came forward, their stories eerily similar. Always the same pattern. Jasmine would identify successful but trusting men, create a whirlwind romance, gradually isolate them from friends and family, then systematically drain their finances before disappearing. How could I not have seen it? Jason asked during Sunday dinner, pushing potatoes around his plate. It's so obvious in retrospect. Because she was good at what she did, I replied. And because you weren't looking for deception. You were looking for love. His trial testimony had been scheduled, postponed, and rescheduled twice. Each delay wore on him, the anticipation more difficult than the act itself would be. But Rebecca assured us the case was solid. Jasmine would face consequences for her actions. Justice, however delayed, was coming. Harold Whitman had become a regular visitor to our home, joining us for Sunday dinners and occasional weeknight meals. His quiet presence was a comfort steady, undemanding. He'd begun teaching Jason chess, their matches stretching for hours on the porch as I brought them lemonade and listened to their thoughtful conversation. She was granted another continuance, Jason announced one evening in late April, hanging up the phone after a call from Rebecca. Trial pushed back to June. Harold frowned. More delaying tactics. She's hoping witnesses will get frustrated, give up. Or that Jason will weaken. I added, voicing the fear I'd been carrying. I won't, Jason said firmly. Not anymore, and I believed him. The son who sat before me now wasn't the same man who had returned to my home broken and ashamed 6 months ago. His eyes were clear, his posture straight. He laughed more easily, spoke more honestly. In losing the false life Jasmine had constructed, he'd found his true self again. On a warm May afternoon, I was planting geraniums in my front flower beds when a sleek car pulled up across the street. A woman emerged, elegant, sophisticated around my age. She hesitated, then approached with measured steps. Diana Brooks? She asked, her voice cultured but uncertain. Yes, I replied, brushing dirt from my knees as I stood. My name is Eleanor Whitman. Harold's daughter. I stared at her in confusion. Harold told me his daughter died years ago. Eleanor's expression softened. No, but our relationship did. She gestured toward Harold's house. Is he home? I've been trying to find the courage to knock for 20 minutes. Come inside, I offered. I'll make coffee while you tell me what this is about. Over steaming mugs at my kitchen table, Eleanor shared her story. She hadn't died in a car accident as Harold believed. She'd faked her death to escape an abusive husband, the only way she could think to disappear completely when he'd threatened to kill her if she left. I changed my name. Moved across the country, she explained. I was terrified Edward would find me. He had connections in law enforcement, friends in high places. I couldn't risk contacting anyone from my old life, not even Dad. But Harold is a skilled investigator, I said. Surely he would have discovered the truth. He did, she said simply. Eventually. But by then I'd built a new life. I was remarried, had a daughter. I was afraid of disrupting everything, of Edward somehow finding me through Dad. Her eyes filled with tears. I convinced myself it was kinder to let him believe I was gone. He's been grieving you for 15 years, I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. I know. She looked down at her hands. When I finally worked up the courage to contact him last year, I discovered he'd moved. It took me months to track him here, then more months to find the courage to come. She met my gaze directly. He told you about me? He said his daughter died, that her husband was abusive, that he couldn't save her. I paused. He recognized Jasmine because of what happened to you. Eleanor nodded, fresh tears spilling. That sounds like Dad, still trying to save others when he couldn't save me. She hesitated. Do you think he'll forgive me? Before I could answer, the front door opened. Harold stood in the entryway, frozen, his face a mask of shock. Caroline? He whispered, using the name she'd abandoned 15 years ago. Hi. Dad, Eleanor replied, her voice breaking. What followed was too private for words. The reunion of a father and daughter separated by fear, misunderstanding, and lost years. I slipped out to the garden, giving them space to begin the difficult work of reconciliation. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the day, Harold found me deadheading roses. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For being here when she came. For listening to her story, he paused. For being my friend these past months when I thought I had no one. I touched his weathered hand gently. We saved each other, I think. 2 weeks later, Jasmine accepted a plea deal. 20 years with possibility of parole after 12. No trial necessary. No testimony from Jason or the other victims. It was over, finally and completely. We celebrated with a small dinner. Jason, Harold, Eleanor, who was staying in Aurora to rebuild her relationship with her father, and me. As we raised our glasses in a toast to justice, to second chances, to truth, I looked around the table and felt a profound sense of peace. To beginnings, Jason said, smiling at me across candlelight, and to endings, Harold added, his hand covering his daughter's. Later, after everyone had gone, I stood on my porch under a sky scattered with stars. The neighborhood was quiet, houses glowing with warm light against the darkness. In one of those houses, Jason was planning lessons for his summer classes. In another, Harold and Eleanor were continuing their careful journey back to father and daughter. And I was here, in the home where I'd raised my son alone, where I'd grieved my sister, where I'd nearly lost everything. But I hadn't lost everything. In fact, I'd gained something precious. My voice, my truth, my sense of self. I thought of Madeline then, how she'd warned me about Jasmine from the beginning. She's wearing a mask, she'd said, and she had been right, as sisters so often are. The shattered porcelain I'd dropped the day Jasmine's crimes were exposed on the news had been repaired. A small bowl now holding keys by my front door, its cracks filled with gold in the Japanese tradition of kintsugi. More beautiful for having been broken. Perhaps we were all like that bowl now. Broken, mended, stronger at the seams. I whispered into the night air, hoping somehow Madeline could hear. I lost my sister, but I found my voice. And sometimes that's how healing begins.